for peace someday. Thank you. You may be seated.
Before we begin today's sermon, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something important. The story of Rahab takes place in Jericho, in an ancient city which is now located in the West Bank, a region that is still marked by walls and division and conflict. This story that we are going to talk about today is about the conquest and occupation of Jericho by the biblical Israelites. Now, the Bible frames this conquest as a part of Israel's divine mandate to enter the promised land. But today, we must recognize that these stories were written in a specific historical and theological context. The stories were told in a way that reflect the struggles and understanding of God's people at that time. Today, we recognize that God's ultimate will is not for conquest and not for division, but for reconciliation, justice, and peace. Both Palestinians and Israelis are beloved by God and deserve dignity, self-governance, and peace. The story of Rahab reminds us of a peace that comes from trust in God, even in uncertain times. So when we reflect on that story today, a story about conquest, I want us to remember that Jesus' death on the cross shows us that God is about taking power not by force or by dividing people by nationality. It's about building peace with humility and grace. With that in mind, we turn to this story of Rahab and the lessons it holds for us today. Well, by the way, I want to say thank you for the volunteers who decorated the sanctuary. It looks very, very beautiful. I appreciate everybody who took part in that. But as you look around the room and you see the red bows placed up there, immediately I think of Christmas joy. But this year, they reminded me of something else. Today, they remind me of something else. Today, they remind me of the scarlet cord hanging in the window in ancient Jericho. Today, for me, the bows are a foreshadow of the nativity story and the God who comes to earth humbly. Rahab, the woman who tied the cord there, she doesn't seem like she's part of the Christmas story, does she? I mean, she isn't part of the nativity scene that we know so well and love so well. Rahab isn't part of the manger where there is the Virgin Mary, where it's Joseph and angels and shepherds and more. That's a very heavenly telling of the Christmas story. And yet, when Matthew gives his story about the nativity, when Matthew starts his gospel, Matthew starts with Rahab, because Matthew starts with the genealogy of Jesus. And Rahab's name is in there. So imagine, if you will, Matthew, the gospel writer, Matthew, a disciple of Jesus, pulls a strand of Jesus' hair when Jesus is asleep. It's hypothetical, right? Matthew knew the history of Jesus through oral telling, right? Like they passed the stories down. But just imagine, just play with it, and imagine that Matthew steals a piece of Jesus' DNA, a strand of his hair, or grabs his toothbrush, puts it in a package and sends it off to one of those ancestry sites, right? And he's hoping for the DNA results of that genealogy test. And what's he hoping to find? Maybe what a lot of people hope to find, right? They want names of distinction in their family. They want to find out that they are related to kings and warriors and visionaries. But the results come back with these names right here. Who feels brave enough to read the first slide for me? Go ahead, Becky. Tamar. So we heard about Tamar we heard about Tamar last week. We heard that Tamar had slept with her father-in-law Judah, and Judah was the mother of her children. Who wants to read the next slide for me? I'll pick somebody if nobody volunteers. Go ahead, Emily. Good job. And we're hearing about Rahab today. And the last one. Let's hear a guy read. I will call somebody. There you go, Alex. So next week, we're going to hear about Uriah's wife, who is so scandalous that they couldn't even refer to her by her name, Bathsheba. And the week after that, we're going to hear about Ruth. So you can see the genealogy of Jesus is not quite righteous. Now, to be fair, Matthew does find King David in Jesus' family line, so there is royalty in there. But he also finds a messy history. His results come back with names that raise eyebrows: sinners and outsiders, and peoples whose stories most family would prefer to quickly and quietly forget. You know, the grandma or the uncle or the cousin you don't really speak about. But instead of hiding those names, Matthew writes them down. He doesn't put them in the shredder. He doesn't delete them from the cloud. He doesn't tuck them in the drawer. Matthew writes down the names to pass them on to people so that his people could see it and we could see it. He doesn't shy away from the brokenness in Jesus' family because Matthew knows what it means to be broken. And Matthew knows what it means to be an outsider. And Matthew knows what it means to be accepted by Jesus. Oh, he was an outsider. He had labels put on him by others who considered themselves more righteous than him. They thought of people of outsiders like Tamar and like Rahab, and they didn't think these people deserved the love of God. And yet, legally speaking, Jesus comes from these people. And Jesus comes up to Matthew, who had that label of traitor, betrayer, a despised tax collector. And he goes up to Matthew and without telling him to change, says to Matthew, "Follow me." And yet today there are so many people who put labels on us that are meant to keep us away from the love of God. Homeless, gay, addict, transgender. And yet, God's reckless inclusivity says that they are embraced despite what the so-called righteous say. And more than that, they belong to Jesus' family. Matthew records these names because these names tell a story about who God is, the inclusivity of God, a God who doesn't filter out people based on their experiences or their brokenness. God embraces people in their mess and then redeems them. God welcomes people like you and like me and like Rahab. Rahab lived in a city called Jericho, and the city's walls were impressive walls. I can think of political leaders who might like those walls. They're about 20 feet high. They're 6 feet wide. They were one of the first walls built with such security in their time. The walls symbolized strength, and the walls symbolized security for those who lived inside it. In fact, the walls were so thick that they built homes inside the walls. But for Rahab, known as prostitute, They probably also represented a life of judgment and exclusion. So when two Israelite spies come to her door to assess if they could take over her land, Rahab had a choice. She could turn them in. She could turn them into the king and protect herself, leaving things unchanged for her, or she could do something else. And Rahab had heard the stories about the God of Israel. She tells the spies she heard about the God who parted seas and the God who defeated kings and provided an entire nation a place to be in the wilderness. And so she believed. She believed in what she heard and she decided to do something different. She took a leap of faith and trust in this God that she only heard about. She hid the spies and she sent her king's men in the wrong direction to look for the spies. And because of that, the spies said that they would not harm her when they came back to take over the city. They told her to tie the scarlet cord in her window as a sign of her faith in their promise. And she did it. She did it because she believed in the God she only heard about. She did it without knowing the outcome because she trusted in the character of God. She trusted that God was already at work before and God continues to be at work in the world. I think what she tells us is that stepping into uncertainty might look different for each of us. It could mean taking risks in relationships like she did. It could mean embracing a new opportunity. Stepping out into uncertainty might mean choosing to forgive when reconciliation feels uncertain. It could mean speaking out for justice when the outcome is unclear. And whatever it looks like, trusting in God means that we believe that we don't face the unknown alone. It means trusting that God is already at work and continues to be weaving together a story that we cannot fully comprehend. And that can lead to peace. In a world of uncertainty, when we are certain about the Creator's character as being steadfast and faithful and loving, that gives us peace. The question that Rahab's story asks us is this: what scarlet cords are we tying in faith today? What steps of trust can we take even when we don't know the outcome, because we trust in the character and presence of God? That question is up on the next slide. If we can have that next slide, please. Thank you. So what scarlet cords are we tying in today? Oh, sorry. No, it's not. It's okay. What steps of trust can we take even when we don't know the outcome to come? Because we trust in the character and presence of God. And after tying that scarlet cord, Rahab did that thing that we don't like doing. After she put that cord on that window, she had to wait. She waited for something that she didn't actually even know what she was waiting on. After she tied that cord, she listened. She listened once a day as the Israelite soldiers marched and circled the city and then returned to their camp. One day after another, Rahab and her family waited. The sounds of footsteps and trumpets echoed in their ears. For 6 days, the Israelites marched around Jericho, and Rahab stayed her course. She didn't panic, and it wasn't because Jericho's walls were so sturdy. Her peace didn't come from within the walls of Jericho. Her peace came from the God she had chosen to trust, and she had a visible reminder of that trust, the scarlet cord. On the 7th day, the Israelite army marched around the walls 7 times, and they blew their trumpets and shouted, and the walls came crumbling down. Waiting isn't easy. Waiting isn't comfortable. We want answers now. We want solutions now. We want resolutions now, and we want control as we wait. And Rahab's waiting teaches us something important. Peace isn't about that. Peace isn't about answers. Peace isn't about control. Peace isn't about having the solutions. Peace, when we can't control the circumstance, is rooted in the trust of God, even when circumstances feel uncertain. So my question for you today is, what is one area of your life when you feel you're in a season of waiting? Where are you right now in a season of waiting? And how might you be trusted in God's promises as you wait? How might you know that God is there with you? And how might you experience peace in that waiting? After the 7 days passed and the walls fell, her story didn't end with that. After the city is destroyed, Rahab's house is saved and her family is saved, and the Israelites keep their promise. She's not brought any harm. Rahab becomes part of God's family in more than one way. You heard she married someone. They had a son named Boaz, and Boaz became the great-grandfather of King David. From her family line came Jesus, the Savior of the world. Her peace wasn't just about saving herself from the fall of Jericho. It was about stepping into an identity as part of God's family, into redemption, and therefore into peace. Here's the thing about redemption, though. Redemption doesn't erase our past. Redemption tells us that even our experiences, even the painful ones, even the broken ones, even the ones that make us part of who we are transformed by this story. That the world might put labels on us. The world might see that we are irredeemable. The world might say that we are not deserving of God's love. But God invites us into something that is beautiful and meaningful and full of promise, and that gives us peace. I think that when the Israelites looked at that cord, they probably saw a reminder of the blood of the lamb smeared on the doorsteps, on the doorposts when they were slaves in Egypt. And it saved them from being killed. And that scarlet cord can remind us of the blood shed by Jesus Christ, who welcomes us into God's family. The Jesus who did not come from a righteous family. The Jesus who comes and saves and redeems us into God's family, no matter where we have been or what we have done or what labels people put on us. So what might God do with your story? Think about the parts of you that you are hesitant to share. Think about the parts of you that people say to you are unworthy of being loved by God. Think about the mistakes and the failures and the struggles, because God has a way of taking those very things and using them to reveal God's power and grace and love. And that gives you peace. Because just as Rahab's courage and faith became a legacy of redemption, that's the real story here. Conquest isn't the story. Physical conquest isn't the story. Rahab's redemption into the story of God is the real story here. And your story, too, can be one of hope and inspiration for others. The question isn't whether God can use your story. The question is whether you are willing to trust God with your story. I'm going to repeat that. The question isn't whether God can use your story. The question is whether you're willing to trust God with your story. Are you willing to let God take the broken and the messy and the overlooked pieces of your life? And are you willing to let God weave them into something better than you could even imagine? And what peace could happen if you let God use those parts you wish you were different? What peace could happen if you let go of control of the circumstances? What peace could happen if you just believed that something beautiful and redemptive was happening in the messiness and in the unknown? Redemption doesn't change your story, but it impacts the stories of those around you. It points to the one who makes all things new. So what might God do with your story? Because the truth is, we will all face moments when we are not sure of what our situation is. We will all face seasons when the roads ahead feel unclear. Life is always going to bring us moments of waiting, of challenges, of transitions, where we have to wait for answers that we crave, when the outcome seems out of reach for us, when we have no control over our situation. And in those moments, we can learn from Rahab. Peace doesn't come from control of our circumstances. Peace doesn't come when things seem perfect or resolved. Peace comes from trusting that God is faithful. For us, finding peace might look like praying for strength when we feel weak. Peace might come from surrendering control in a situation we cannot fix, or choosing to believe that God is at work even when we cannot see the results. And that's what this slide is about. For peace, Rahab's story tells us to trust in God's character. She trusted in a God that she only heard stories about. When we focus on God's character, a God who delivers and redeems, we can find peace in the unknown. Hold on to God's promises. Rahab's scarlet cord gave us a reminder of God's promise. Hold on to reminders of God's promises in your life. Maybe it's scripture for you. Maybe it's prayer. Maybe it's gathering with other Christians. Maybe it's a memory that you had of God working in your life in the past. Let those promises be an anchor for peace for you. Surrender control. Rahab couldn't control the outcome. She had to trust God. And this Advent season, you might ask, where is God asking you to let go of control and just trust in God's plan? And look toward redemption. Rahab's story reminds us that God takes the broken and God takes the messy and God takes the people that others say is not worthy and God creates something beautiful. So trust that God's peace isn't just for now, it's for the bigger picture, and you are part of God's story. The same God that invites peace into Rahab's life invites peace into you today. Not a peace that avoids the battle, because we are always going to have a battle in our lives of some kind. Invite peace that carries you through the battle. So I'm going to invite you to come up and tie your own scarlet cord or pin your own scarlet cord on the wall. Pray for peace or take a moment to do what you need to do as you stand by the wall, a promise of God's faithfulness. Let it remind you that God is faithful, and let peace wash over you as you place your life in God's hands. I'll do it first to show you. If you can, hold on to the top because the wall might come crumbling down. Right. You're welcome to come up and pin a cord on the wall.